We're honored to welcome Dr. Vernon Katz to our synagogue tonight. We're honored to host him every year for all these many years. It's always a treat to see him on our campus. He's obviously an honored member of the meditating family and holds a cherished place in Maharshi's heart. And so we're truly blessed to have him here. I've actually been reading Vernon's book, and if you haven't read it, you should. He's a wonderful storyteller and an excellent writer, and it's a very, very insightful and interesting look into a very important part of our history, and so I highly recommend it. And Vernon, following in the great tradition of David Lynch, would like to entertain questions rather than launch into a dissertation. And have many people had an opportunity to read through the book a little bit? Okay.
May I just thank everybody for coming and honoring my mother. I'm very, very touched and happy that you've all come. Thank you very much.
I'll ask the first question.
Come on.
Great.
Come on.
Did you, having not read every last word of the book, did you have much of a intensive Jewish educational upbringing? Was there a day school, a Sunday school? Was there how frequently did you come in contact with the world of the liturgy of it all and the learning the language? Did you speak Hebrew?
No, there wasn't very much. My father was fairly orthodox, but he kept his religion to himself, and he was just a lone voice in a fairly heathenish and he never, I'm sorry somehow that he never sort of pushed me into a more really Jewish upbringing. I mean, I went to synagogue with him and all that sort of thing. And he was, the other thing was, oh, it's not loud enough.
Yeah, you can get it right up close to it.
Yeah.
Is it on?
Is it on?
It's on. It's on. It's like the rock and roll singers. You get right up close to it there.
Can we pack it up from the back?
I've left my guitar at home.
Yeah, we should be able to.
That's better.
That's better. That's better.
You think so?
That's good.
I'm being told.
No, it was
No, it's
by
good.
somebody.
It was
It's
better.
good.
It was better when he had it
It's better.
closer.
I'm being told to speaking to the front of the speaker.
Yes, that's right. To the front.
So I'm going to do this. Don't you move. I don't want to knock your teeth out here. That wouldn't be really good. So we want to speak into the. Oops. Where's Winston when you need him?
Is that better? Yeah, it wasn't really. My grandmother was the only person who was Orthodox in the household, and she felt very much like a lone voice in a household of sin. So there wasn't much. I went with Father, we went to synagogue and so on, and so on. The other thing is, we're Kohanim, and my father would never bless the congregation. He felt that he wasn't worthy. I think he was wrong because it's not a question of worth, it's a question of birth. But that's how he felt. And every time the Kohanim went up these big fat cheetahs and were blessing people, my father wouldn't do it. And so we went out. Father and I went out when that happened. He was quite a humble man in that sense. Oh, thank you.
Yes, one here.
Brett.
When did you experience the change in social consciousness that led to the rise of the Nazis. And how did you experience it?
Yeah, that was something. And the thing is, it was, what I learned was the gradualness of evil, that it creeps up very slowly. You start something and, well, oh, thank you, yes. You start something and it just, you take one step after the other. The first step was they crossed the road when they saw us. Didn't want do it. And then gradually they became more hostile as time went on. And it was very strange. There were very few people. There were a few families. And this is an important point, that only people who had some belief kept their thing. Most people just went with the crowd, as we all do normally. I would say if we hadn't been Jews, we would have done the same probably. But there were people. There was one family, a very Christian family, and they were wonderful. And there was another family. They were very left-wing, sort of socialist, communist, and they also, because it was, they had some faith, and they didn't tag along with the majority. It's very interesting. And the other thing was how gradual it all was. One thing after another became, first, as I said, they crossed the road, then they got a little bit more hostile, and then, the Nuremberg laws cut in. That was a big thing.
Could you explain that?
Pardon?
I'm sorry, what was that?
The Nuremberg laws.
Okay.
Those were the laws that, took away the rights of Jews. And there were these absolutely stupid things they did. They had Mischling. What's Mischling? They had half castes, or whatever you call it, of the first degree. When you were half Jewish, they had half caste of the second degree when you were there, and then you had to see who could marry whom and what would happen to it. And then they had the other thing they had was that no Aryan female could be in a Jewish household if they were under 45. They had to, my nanny and the cook had to leave, and we got a woman who was a battle axe. She'd been in America, lived in America, and she was not anti-Semitic particularly, but she felt she'd done us a favor by coming and working for us. And so, yes?
You mentioned that you felt as if you had detected, being a youngster, exposed to your 8- and 9-year-old peers, that you detected a change before your parents did, and that you realized something was amiss before your parents. Did you bring that up to them? You did mention that you were treated like an adult very much.
Exactly.
You were in on all the
I
conversations.
was a little old man by the time I was 8 years old. I knew everything that went on. And a lot of it was not very nice. And they had no secrets in that sense. But you're right. They took a long time.
But did you bring it up to them? Did you bring it
No,
up?
I didn't bring up to it, no. They took a long time before their eyes were open. They felt so German, Well, most Jews did, they were German, after all. And they felt and they couldn't understand what had happened. They really couldn't understand it. You know, my grandmother lost 2 sons in the First World War, and she, you know, when the things came, she kept on saying, she kept on quoting the letter she received. The fatherland's thanks will always be yours, and so on, and you know, see that. And so, I mean, they were like that, they just couldn't understand it. And we were in a small town, so the people in big towns often, you know, they were more aware of things than we were, but got out by the skin of our teeth. My parents got out on the 29th of August 1939, and most of the people in the Kindertransport came with me. They never saw their parents again. We were very, very lucky that my mother was in prison, and if you read the book, you'll see it. My mother was in prison, and she came out on the 24th of August. I get a bit emotional when I say that. My father sent a telegram saying, "Mother came home today." It was the most wonderful news I heard. And anyway, they came with a last boat from Rotterdam to Tilbury before the war came out, before the war started. I came a few months earlier on the Kindertransport. So we were very lucky, but most of the people in the Kindertransport never saw their parents again.
What happened to your father while your mother was in jail, was in prison?
My father has stories. My father was in Buchenwald concentration camp, but he came out. You know, they had all the Jews in 1938 in the Kristallnacht. Nearly all the Jews came out. You know, I was there. We were there in the house, and you heard all this noise. You know, the people were breaking the windows and things like that, and shouting and so on. That was the night of the broken glass, they called it. And then the next day, nearly all the male Jews were taken in and sent to concentration camps. My father, there's a nice policeman there, and he gave my father some time so that he could pack and do things. He was a decent man. And my mother packed various things, and they were very cruel. They were beaten up and so on. They're cruel, but I mean, they didn't. You know, they weren't killed or they weren't harmed at that time, because it was before the war, still in 1938. And but I listened to the stories of my father and my uncle, and all the things that happened. It was very cruel. They were very cruel people. And anyway, he came home, and my mother at that time was in the asylum. My mother's very unlucky in many ways, because we had you read it all in the book, there was a Nazi man whom they put in as the head of the trade unions in our factory, and so on. And he said that my mother had said that Goering and all their cabinet should be shot. And so the Gestapo came, and they, was something. And so we had this doctor, and he thought it was best if my mother got out of the way, so they sent her to a sort of asylum, so that she could get out. And she really got quite hysterical sometimes during that time. Because I went to see her, she was in a grey smock there, and she was crying, uncontrollably. And so then she was very brave afterwards, because then they came up and they said, the Gestapo, and she came before the court, I think. And then the man, that was lucky, the man said he retracted somewhere. He said he thought he heard her or something like that, and she got off. But then she got into prison again, because when my father went to Buchenwald, they tried to get them out, and the way to get it out was that they get a visa from some country, and so on. And so this Uruguayan consul was selling visas, and my mother, heard about it, and she phoned and she went, and then they found the list of this consul, and so all the people were, and my mother was put in prison, and she got out, as I say, in time. Again, we were very lucky, because she got out. They had a very good lawyer who happened to be a Jew, I think, ultimately, and she was very brave again there, and said, that she never, what would you have done if your husband been in prison or something like that? Anyway, she got off eventually, but she was in prison for 3 months in the women's prison near Hamburg, and that was the worst time. So, you see, it's still quite right when you think about it. That was the worst time of my life, because I was in England, and I knew my mother was in prison, and then I learned to pray. I really learned to pray. So, this is not the worst story, because the people who later on who were deported and so on, that's much worse. I don't say this is a bad story, but it was nasty while it happened. Anyway, she got off, and thank God they had some good years. They had some good years in England afterwards.
How did you get reunited?
Oh, they came over. They came to Cardiff, and I went to Cardiff, and I saw them, but they couldn't afford to have me, so I stayed in the hostel for another year or something like that before I actually rejoined them. I used to see them, or they used to come and see me, but they were not. My father was not allowed to work at first, and then when the British interned him, they interned all the enemy aliens, so-called, which you could understand, because the invasion was there any time, and you never knew what a foreigner could do. I don't blame them for that, really. And he was interned with all the Nazis. So just for a month or so, they were not treated badly, but they were sent to the Isle of Man. And, but anyway, that was the story.
Vernon, when you started getting your family became established, more established in England, and by that time you were a teenager or something?
Yeah, it must have been, yes.
And so in making your way through school, you ended up going on to Oxford and having a distinguished education. Was there,
Or
was it a difficult
That was-
life there being in it?
that was all due to my father. I can't thank my father enough. Without my father, I wouldn't be, never met Maharshi. My father was, at the time, he was still unemployed. His English was horrible. He could speak English, but he had a huge vocabulary, but he couldn't pronounce it. And so he heard from there was a man who was interned with him who ran a boys' hostel in Oxford. And he told my father about how one of the boys had been to the City of Oxford High School for boys there. So my father got it into his head that I should get to the City of I was 13 years old. I was 2 years too late. You start at 11 there, and I nearly 2 years, I had no French, I had no algebra, I had no trigonometry, I had no geometry, none of the subjects there. I was at senior school. I was quite happy there. I was a prefect. I was very happy. And my mother said, oh, let him be. But my father knew that I needed an education. So what he did, he got lifts to go to Oxford. Once the police took him in because they thought he was a spy. He had spoke such bad English. And so, but anyway, he went to see the headmaster, and the headmaster said, we can't possibly take him, it's too late for him. And my father said, my boy will do it. And so he laid siege to the headmaster 2 or 3 times, and by the force of his personality, he was a salesman, the force of his personality, he got him to take me. And I ended up top of the school. Not because I was intelligent, but because I was a swot. You know, I used to work very, very hard, you know, and I had a very good memory, but not particularly intelligent. But anyway, so it was my father whom I owe everything to, you know, and so he got me into this very nice school in Oxford, which Lawrence of Arabia went to that school, and then later on went to university, you know. And he paid for me by that time because I didn't have a scholarship. And then my tutor, my economics tutor, was Harold Wilson, who was later became president. And I was very pally with him. And one day he said, I put in your name for an internal exhibition, which is a kind of scholarship. So he got me a scholarship. I mean, not a complete scholarship, but I mean, it helped. And so I was all right. I was very friendly with him and his wife and everything. And then later on, when he thought I'd be in economics, when so I wanted to do it in philosophy. He washed his hands of me. I'd gone mad. And funnily enough, I saw him again just before he died in Victoria Street. He went to the same, not the same hairdresser that I did, but to the son of my hairdresser. And anyway, and we talked, and he was already a little bit, not completely, but anyway, I said, you know, I'm Katz, and you know, I said I was, you know, and he pretended to remember. I don't think he did. But we spoke about Sanskrit and so on, and I told him what I was doing.
Vernon,
There must have been some prejudice against Germans in England. I mean, were you there when England was getting bombed by Germany?
Yeah. No, there was no prejudice. I mean, the officials, you know, as I say, they put the men into the Isle of Man, but that was simply, I mean, it was understandable, you know. when you think about it. Any time the invasion could have come, we were really expecting it all the time. And of course, we would have been ashes if it had come. But it didn't, and thank God for that.
What got you launched into Sanskrit?
But
What got you launched into Sanskrit?
the Upanishads. I read the Upanishads, and soon I read them, I had that feeling, here's the truth. These fellows knew what they were talking about. It was really the Upanishads that did it. And then, of course, I was so lucky because I met Dr. Radhakrishnan, the great Indian scholar who later became President of India. And he became my advisor for my thesis when he was there. Most of the time he was away. He was in Moscow, ambassador, he was at UNESCO, head of UNESCO. And in the end, the university got fed up. Then he became vice president of India, and then the university said, "You'll spend more time here. You have to go." And then in the end, he left there. But he was professor, Pauling Professor of Eastern Religions and Ethics at Oxford, and he's a great man. And we read the Upanishads in his rooms in All Souls on Sunday morning, and you would think, there were crowds of people. There were 4 or 5 undergraduates and 4 or 5 old women from North Oxford there. That was all.
Not even a million.
Because it was in the 50s, the late 40s, 50s, and that thing for Eastern thought hadn't yet come. So it was, it was a few years earlier. So we're so lucky to have him, all to ourselves practically. It was great, yes.
How did you meet Maharishi then?
Pardon?
What was your step to meeting Maharishi?
Meeting Maharishi. It was, they knew what my interests were, and I had these relatives who lived in South Africa, and they came every 2 years, and they met me, and we went out to some friends, Bianchi's restaurant. They were friends of mine in Soho, and they brought a friend along of theirs because they knew who was also interested in these Eastern things. They brought him along, and this fellow was a teacher of Scientology and a Maharishi meditation guide. He was both. And he tried to interest me in both. And at that time, Maharishi, how Maharishi built up his movement. He took anybody who came along, anybody, because he had to start somewhere. So he didn't make any preconditions. And it's only gradually that he did that. So it could be both. And he tried to interest me in Scientology. Was it Scientology? Yes, Scientology. And I couldn't make head or tail of it. And then he tried to interest me in Eastern thought. And again, I got these sepia-colored photos of Gurudev and so on. I thought, I've seen all this 100 times before, I'm not really interested in it. And then this fellow, very, very wonderfully, he persisted 3 times. He phoned me 3 times. I thought, well, it's only courteous. I should go and see this man. And of course, when I saw him, when I met him, I was caught. I didn't believe a word he said. I thought, he said it's easy because you need disciples, a few disciples and so on. But I was just charmed by him, absolutely charmed. It was his laughter did it for me. His laughter. He was so light, and that just caught me. And it was 3 months after I'd started to meditate. It was the first residence European medicine course at the Black Forest in 1960, over Christmas 1960. And then I had a conversion. It was like, like St. Paul in some way. It was a conversion. You know how these conversions work? They underground for a long time, and then something comes up and it sparks it off. And it was just like she said in the Upanishad. They have these creation stories, something very simple, and it goes from the subtle to the gross. In transcendental meditation, we go from the gross to the subtle. It was just something like that, and just somehow my eyes were open, and then everything you said made sense. like a sort of wave of wisdom pouring over me. And I say goodbye to him at Munich airport. He nodded, said, I've said this so often, very good, very good. You have unlearned a lot of things. I was so lucky. They came to him at that time, when there weren't many people, also not people doing Sanskrit and all that sort of thing. Very lucky in the right timing, because if it had been later, there's so many good people in the movement today, people who know Sanskrit much better than I do. But it was just, I was lucky. Must have been some good karma for some time.
Yeah. Vernon, when you look back now, after all these years, in terms of going through this experience of the Holocaust,
I didn't quite hear.
when you look back, this whole experience, going through the Holocaust, and then having this, being fortunate enough to meet Maharishi, first, there's two parts of the question. First of all, if you look back, was there some way that on a deep inner level that going through the experience of the Holocaust affected you, and was there ever a point where that flip-flop, where what seemed to be a curse turned out to be a blessing, in terms of the way this whole experience has unfolded in your life, from total ignorance in the Holocaust to this place of enlightenment? I'm just curious about that inner process for you.
Yeah, it was a contest, no doubt about that. And as I say, a lot of that I really owe to my father. That my father was not an easy man, but he got me this education which eventually led to Maharishi. Otherwise I wouldn't have met Maharishi. And I didn't think much about the Holocaust, and not the Holocaust, the Nazi period. And I don't know, when I did this book, it came to me, I was in Boppard with a Pulsar. Boppard is a town on the Rhine. We had this big monastery there. And I was walking in the monastery garden there, and suddenly all these memories came crowding in, one after the other. And so I thought I'd write them down, so I wrote them down very, very quickly. And that was the basis of the book. That's when it happened. I think it was 85 or something like that, I don't remember. That was the basis of it. Because I never thought I'd write a book, but then this experience in that must have been maybe something to do with rounding or something. I don't know. But anyway, that's the genesis of the book. That's how it started.
Was it cathartic to bring out all that out, to bring out those experiences?
I can't quite hear you.
Was it cathartic?
Cathartic.
To write the book.
I don't know, because I enjoy writing, and I enjoyed doing the book, even though the memories were terrible. And it was only really, it was the last chapter when they were talking about the people who died, the list that I wrote down. It was only that last chapter. They had the mayor of our town, I met them and they gave me a list of the people who died. You know, people I'd known as a child. Some of them anyway, known as a child. And then just it all broke down. I thought, well, I don't want to look at that list. No, I look at it when I'm in the bus to Bielefeld. And then I broke down there. So, funny, it was just a list, you know. It just, all it said was, so-and-so, born at that time, died, murdered in so-and-so, you know.
Did you have a chance to speak
I can't hear you, sorry.
Did you have a chance to speak with Maharshi about your Jewish DNA and Vedic Dharma, so to speak? You know, like those two sides of you as a seeker. Did you have a chance to?
I didn't know. Maharshi was not. He was not in favor really of these things. He never wanted anything. In the past, he was always looking to the future. He wouldn't. You know, he dissuaded Jeffrey Abramson's father. Did this Holocaust, was it museum or something, in Washington D.C. And Maharshi didn't want it really, but I mean it came up just the same. He was not in favor of these things really, and I never talked to him about it much now, because his philosophy was, you know, look forward, be positive, and so on. But, you know, it's very difficult, you know, when you've been through that sort of thing. You can't completely forget it, and you can see how it's there, and how it breaks down, you know, sometimes when you cry. You know, you can't think about it normally, in normal days, but then when it comes, you can see it's still there, you know, still there. This deep stress is still there, you know.
So Vernon, being Jewish, I have to ask this question. That, you know, I believe, you know, the other side of this story is that history does repeat itself. I mean, are there lessons learned? Are there things that you would, you know, at your point in life, I mean, looking back, are there things that you would say that would be important for people to know regarding, you know, life and society, and good things and bad things, and what sorts of things do people need to know?
I don't have much wisdom. I was lucky to be with Maharshi, but I'm not really very wise. I never sort of can give advice to people really. But I don't know. I think one has to be careful with what one thinks. You know, this, as I was saying, this, you know, crossing the road was the first thing that happened. You know, evil is very insidious. Mm-hmm. It can just creep up on you just like that. And that's what happens. So one has to be very careful, really, not to take that first step. Because once you take the first step, then it goes on. And that's, a lot of people did that, you know, who one thought were good people, but who weren't, you know, who were, you know, when the thing came, they didn't behave well. And for most of that little town, they were not good, they were not nice to the Jews. There were just a few families only who stood out against it, not many. And as I said, that's because they were people who had an alternative belief, whether it was left-wing or whether it was religious or what. But not all religious people either, of course, you know, only some. but there was a good family.
Vernon, these people, before the evil started, was there an undercurrent of the Germans in the town not feeling completely comfortable with the Germans who were Jewish? Was there, before the whole thing actually broke out into becoming very dramatic and very concrete, years before that, were there feelings among the Germans who were not Jewish that for some reason, somehow they didn't particularly completely accept or feel completely comfortable with the Germans that were Jewish?
I mean, I was too young to know myself from personal experience, but I think that's true. There was quite some anti-Semitism, and of course there was this thing, you know, that the Jews were clever, and they got to the universities, and they got to all the professions and so on like that, you know, something to do with that, you know, which happens not just the Jews, but any minority. The Armenians are the same, I think, you know, they also get very, you know, very good, any minority like that, you know, because they have to make a special effort. They, you know, they're good, and so that's, they're the minority there, but I mean, I didn't experience it when I was a little boy. I mean, no anti-Semitism. And it's funny because it left a deep impression on me, but my cousin, who was a few years older, didn't have that. Because I was a little boy, because he'd known the good times before, I hadn't known much of the good times. So when we went to Germany together, he said, "Oh, look at that beautiful Lipperland, our country. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it wonderful?" Left me completely cold. You know, I could. And it took me a long time to get over this German thing, which I did because of Marshy, you know. With Marshy, you know, I went with Marshy to Germany, and we met the German meditators and so on. Some became good friends of mine. So, but it took time, you know, to do that. And whenever I was in Germany, I looked at the people's eyes, and I could see I could see some of them, you know, the older people, the eyes, they were terrible. They were terrible. And the new generation, it's gone, but it was not nice. Now, I'm sure there was a guilt in their thing as well, probably. But they, you know, they got all the Nazis back into good positions. I think a lot of that, you know, was it's not that they stayed there. And I know that they didn't release, yes, we should finish. They didn't release, oh gosh, yes, they didn't release the documents until much later, when these Nazis, the powerful Nazis, had died. You know, before that, these documents were not even released. So it was only okay, I think I'll let you go.
Thank you.